Robert F. Kennedy Jr. facing 2 days of contentious confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill as he seeks to become President Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary.
President Trump has asked me, because I'm in a unique position, to end that. And that is what I'm doing. And if we don't solve that problem, Senator, all of the other disputes we have about who's paying, and whether it's insurance companies, whether it's providers, whether it's HMOs, whether it's patients or families, all of those are moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. Our ship is sinking.
Joining us now is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. And Dr. Gottlieb, what was your reaction to what you heard in these confirmation hearings so far?
Well, look, I don't think we learned a lot of things that are new that we didn't already know about his candidacy for this position. From the standpoint of those who've harbored concerns, I think that there are some really clear risks that could flow from his views on particularly vaccines and public health issues more generally. He wouldn't commit to saying that there are any safe vaccines that children should get. He just said he would look at the science, suggesting that the science around vaccines like polio and MMR isn't settled. He was given multiple opportunities to say that vaccines don't cause autism, and he punted every time. He didn't want to answer that question and didn't want to assert that there is any vaccine, and the MMR vaccine in particular, that doesn't cause autism. I think the other thing that became clear from these hearings, both before the Senate Help Committee as well as the Senate Finance Committee, he testified before both committees, is that he doesn't have a really deep understanding of the programs that he's going to administer. He confused Medicare and Medicaid. He didn't know what dual eligibles are, which are people who are dually eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. He didn't know how those programs operated from the standpoint of how they dispersed money between the federal government and the states. He also confused Medicare Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D. At one point, he was asked what Medicare Part A does, and he says it pays for physicians. That's not true. It pays for hospitals. He didn't seem to know what Medicare Part D was. These are just fundamental questions about the structure of the programs that he's going to be charged with administering that he should know. So beyond just his hesitancy around asserting that vaccines are safe and that there's any vaccine that children should go out and get, he didn't know the fundamentals of the programs that he's going to be administering. You know, and the final point was that when he was asked multiple times about the safety of childhood immunizations, he said that if the science is sufficient to demonstrate that they're safe and effective, he would recommend them, which more than suggests that he doesn't believe that there's sufficient science right now to recommend that any child get childhood immunization. I think you can easily infer that from what he said.
You know, I spoke to some people, industry insiders, who are trying to look at the bright side of things, if there's a way that they can kind of feel more comfortable about things. One of them is the idea of Make America Healthy Again. Maybe that's a good thing to get behind. The other would be that there's a huge lack of trust in American institutions, including at the FDA. And maybe if you have someone in there who shines light on some of these things and shows people what's actually happening, maybe they would feel better and trust the agency more. What do you make of those two arguments, Dr. Gottlieb?
Well, look, I think the idea of trying to promote more healthful foods and more healthful diets is exceedingly sound. We tried to do some of these things in the first Trump administration. I moved regulation to require calorie counts on menu labels, for example. I moved regulations that would require reductions in salt in food. I will say that I faced pretty intense opposition when I moved those provisions, not from Democrats, largely from Republicans, although the administration, President Trump, supported me because I think that aligns with his more broader views about public health and trying to promote healthful diets. So I don't think that this is a new phenomenon. You know, I really question whether or not Kennedy is going to have the ability to actually implement the things that he talks about at an aspirational level when he shows such a profound lack of knowledge of these agencies. I've never seen him articulate any substance behind his policy views. When he's asked how he would go about implementing more healthful diets, he says that you need to fire the FDA's nutrition staff because they're all corrupt. That's the last thing you want to do. Those folks in FDA, I've worked with them. They're fully aligned with these kinds of ethos. If the restraints were lifted from them, they would certainly pursue these kinds of goals. The challenge has been that the statute and the existing regulations, but largely the statute, makes it very hard for FDA to do this. For example, it's very hard for FDA to ban a substance that's in food that's, quote, generally regarded as safe, which is a term of art under FDA parlance. The burden is on the FDA to prove that that ingredient is unsafe, and they also have to do an economic analysis to show that it's not going to cause undue harm on the industry. Look at food dye number 3. The FDA finally moved to ban that in the closing days of the Biden administration. That's not going to be implemented until 2028, and look how long that took. They have to give the industry a glide path to get that out of food, because if they didn't, the economic impact analysis would never have gotten through the Office of Management and Budget at the White House. So it shows how hard these things are to do. I'm not saying they're not worth doing. They are. But it's probably going to require a statutory change. And I haven't heard Mr. Kennedy articulate anything in terms of actual policy architecture, how he would achieve these goals.
We have had some Republican senators who have not said how they will vote on this. What's your gut? Do you think he passes nomination?
Well, look, I think you have to favor any candidate, because I think the Senate and Senate Republicans want to give deference to the president. And I think that that's a pretty strong ethos among Republicans right now. But I think that this nomination is shakier today than it was before he went into these hearings. He raised concerns along a number of domains, not just the vaccines. I think people went into these hearings with concerns around his views on vaccines. But his lack of knowledge of these programs, I think, concerned people. That's what I've been hearing. Also, his answers on the agricultural issues, I think, are going to concern agricultural state senators. He doesn't seem to back away from the notion that we need to change agricultural practices in this country, ban certain commonly used pesticides, as well as certainly commonly used genetically modified seeds. His response to questions about that is we need to give the agricultural industry a glide path to move away from these. I don't think the agricultural industry thinks they need a glide path to move away from these practices. And so the question is going to be, does the ag community trust the president, which I believe they do, and trust the USDA secretary more, so they look past Kennedy's comments? But I would say 60-40 right now in terms of his odds of being confirmed, which I think is actually what the betting odds are.
So, Doctor, if in fact he is confirmed, tell us about the power you had in this role to actually change things, and what kind of governors, if you think there were, on you to do things.
Look, from FDA, I had more direct authority to intervene on the kinds of things that Kennedy wants to do. He's going to have to work through the FDA commissioner, and there's a good FDA commissioner that's been nominated for this position, Marty McCreary. I have a lot of confidence in him to do the right thing. So I think, you know, the net result is he can come under a lot of pressure to try to implement Kennedy's views on products like vaccines and other kinds of public health issues. But Kennedy will, if he's confirmed to this position, have some real direct authority. He could disband the advisory committee on immunization practices that CDC convenes to make recommendations on what immunizations should be included in the childhood immunization schedule, for example. He could tie reporting requirements to the Vaccine for Children's program, make it hard for states to take that money. I think he could take down the front-facing pages on the CDC website that say, for example, vaccines don't cause autism. He could release a lot of information, bottom-line information, change some of the conclusions that the agencies have drawn in ways that could open up the industries to litigation, the vaccine industry litigation. I think you could see potentially companies getting out of this space. I think he could pursue what we call a sue and settle strategy, where he invites friendly plaintiffs to sue the agencies and then settles on favorable terms. His trial lawyer community that he's fully ensconced in. In fact, he has, and according to the New York Times, he's owed contingency fees on litigation involving Gardasil, the vaccine for HPV, the vaccine that prevents cervical cancer, and hasn't given up those fees that he's owed on that litigation, which is a very peculiar arrangement. I've never seen something like that before.
Hey, Dr. Gottlieb, people are raising issues on X right now because I apparently did not introduce you as a Pfizer board member, which I feel like we do every time you're on. You're a Pfizer board member. What would it mean for Pfizer, especially from the vaccine perspective, if RFK Jr. is confirmed?
Yeah, I don't think Pfizer would be as directly impacted beyond other pharmaceutical companies. I mean, I do think that there would be impact across the entire industry, but specifically with Pfizer's vaccine portfolio, the pneumococcal vaccine, which they produce, which is given to a pediatric community, doesn't seem to have been in the crosshairs of any of this speculation that Kennedy has raised. He could raise concerns around the COVID vaccine. I think that has largely stabilized as a business in terms of utilization rates. I think he could potentially pull the approval for the pediatric vaccine, where he has expressed the most concern. It's It's relatively small market. Unfortunately, I think more patients, more children should be getting that vaccine, but they don't. So the economic impact, I think, would be very limited in that regard. And Pfizer doesn't make the other childhood immunizations, measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, DTaP, polio. It's largely Sanofi and Merck in this country. So Pfizer wouldn't be impacted from that standpoint.